And thank you very much. Breathtaking sweep of opportunity there. We're keen to explore some of the issues raised there and also broaden out the discussion. So please, I want to welcome to the stage Lance Kawaguchi, who's Managing Director and Global Head of Corporates, GLCM at HSBC, to Prem Barthasarathy, who's Managing Partner, Pontaq, and Arun President for Europe of Freshworks. Please welcome my guest to the stage. Lance, I want to start with you. There's some extraordinary, breathtaking, staggering numbers there. Are you seeing that on the ground?
Absolutely. And also, I just want to thank for being the only one wearing a tie. So I guess I didn't get the memo. I didn't get the memo that it's a casual Monday. But yeah, to your point, I think, Anu, you covered a lot of it. But from a banking perspective, I think it's one of the most exciting countries that I've seen. So every country that I've been to, and I've been to about 23 this year, India seems to be top or first or second in regards to what's going on from a banking landscape. So if you take a step back, UPI, which most people know, Unified Payments Interface, to Anu's point, it not only makes things much easier for people to make payments, it takes the paper aspect out of it, but to the identification point that you're making about the security. India had IMPS, which many of you know, Immediate Payment Service, in 2010. The problem with that, you have to link it to a bank account. But now with UPI, you don't need to. You have a digital ID, so you can make transactions without even having to share your bank account details. So to your point, I think that's one thing that's quite critical. The second thing, I think when Modi coming in on 2014 with the pronunciation is not going to be the best, so I apologize ahead of time. But with the Jan Dhan Yojana, it's amazing that with that program and linking it to Aadhaar, 870 million bank accounts for people who typically would be unbanked because of the KYC requirements. So I think that's quite exciting, because if you take a step back, 870 million bank accounts, that's equivalent to 2.5 times the American population. So what we've seen just from a personal but also from a business perspective is truly amazing. Right, and I can go on more, but I'll pause to explore that. I don't want to monopolize the time.
Arun, wants to do Freshworks is a child, perhaps poster child for India's digital revolution. Walk us through how you got there, because you're now expanding globally and a $1.5 billion unicorn. So where did it start and how did you get there?
So just a quick show of hands. How many of you know Freshworks or heard of it? All right, cool. I'll spend a few minutes spending about it. So there is this silent revolution happening in India, which Anu talked about. I always look at it as like these simple analogies. There is the kitchen and there is a restaurant. And people still, if you go to India, you always see what is known for or immediate comes to mind is, infrastructure issues and so on and so forth. That's what you see. That's what your mind conjures up right away. But there's a silent revolution happening in the back office, in the kitchen, and all the things Anu talked about. And we are part of one of those. So we are a company that was founded 8 years ago, and we produce business software. We compete with the likes of Salesforce and ServiceNow and Zendesk and all these other companies. But this company was founded on a core principle of democratic design. And this is something that we see a lot happening. What is shaping India to go from where it was at such massive numbers and massive scale is our ability to create products with the democratic design principles. IKEA is famously known for that. It's basically simplicity, scalability, creativity, and affordability. So because it is a punishing market, a lot of first-time users getting onto anything you can talk about, their first computer, the first mobile phone, the first bank account. So it has to be really simple. It has to really be affordable. And it has to be easily scalable. And this is how we built the company. And we are taking that principle globally. And our company is now the second fastest growing business software company in the world after Slack. And again, to the kitchen restaurant, many people wouldn't know who we are. And we continue to grow that using the same principles of what we learned, how to survive in the Indian market in Excel, taking the same principles abroad. And a famous example would be IKEA, for you to think about how to make things affordable, a high quality product and service that's actually affordable to everybody. And that's the mission statement for most of the companies I can think about.
Because I'd like to get on to your price points and how you do that as a global business, given the very different markets you're looking at. But let's come to that. Prem, I want to talk to you. Are you seeing these trends? Because you're clearly looking very closely at India. These are enormously positive and outlooks on India and the sort of digital revolution.
I certainly do.
Yeah.
But I see there's still a long way to go. I wear two hats. I'm a managing partner of Pontaq. We are a UK-India fund moving into cross-border. That's on the venture capital and other side. But I also do wear another hat, which is I'm an advisor to a last-mile financial inclusion platform in India, which now today caters to about 26,000 villages, rural villages in India, moving up to 45,000, and catering to about 7 million households, and multiply that by 4. That's the overall addressable population. To put things in perspective, in 1991 census, India had about 630,000 villages. Villages grew, villages got separated into much smaller villages, and today we have about 648,000 villages. Now one would make a math, if it's 500 people per village or 1,000 people per village, you're talking anywhere from 300 million to 600 or 800 million people in rural villages in India. Yes, mobile phone penetration is there, absolutely there, people are taking up. But mobile phone penetration alone is not an indicator of complete digitization. Because I'm talking about real experience in the last 6 weeks I've been in India. We went to the rural-most places in India, and there was this lady with a corner shop selling fruit. She's also a business correspondent of a bank. She provides banking facilities, money, cash, payments, withdrawals. And she uses eKYC, Aadhaar, biometrics, rural parts of India. And she has got a smartphone. She makes 20,000 rupees a month. That's unheard of in rural parts of India. And on top of that, when we had the when we quizzed her a lot more about what is the usage of the smartphone, today it's all about receiving phone calls, making phone calls, and reading text, going back to the vernacular issues that they have. So it's synonymous to a country all of a sudden deciding that they'll give motorbikes to everybody or cars to everybody, but unless until you train them how to drive a car, they can't use the car. So the education or the skills uplift of the people and know-how is something that the government and the country needs to focus on to enable further digitization. I'm not saying it is not happening, it is happening, but could be accelerated with effective educations and skills.
Yeah, you raised that in the report. I think some of you said retraining required. At scale, is that one of the vulnerabilities is that one of the challenges, one of the hurdles that might block the sort of growth you're talking about?
I think yes, but it's not new to India. So I think we have seen many sort of new industries come up with the education system or the skilling and training environment not being geared up to doing the retraining. But what typically happens is that the innovation that organizations are leading, they kind of go backward integration into skilling as well. This happened in the IT sector. The IT companies figured that, the education system wasn't really making people employment ready, but then they stepped into the education system and started shaping curriculum and participating in training so that they got people who didn't have to sit on a bench and be trained for 12 months. We're seeing that happen in the digital world or in the new kinds of businesses that digital is unfolding as well. So I think e-commerce and the whole logistics ecosystem that it has spawned has meant that the e-commerce firms are actually very actively engaged in investing in subsidiaries that do logistics, training the armies of workers that actually need to understand how to operate in this new sort of technology-dependent environment. And therefore, it will be innovation-led, I think, at the end of the day.
As Emma mentioned, I think she used the term, the leaders and laggards. What are you seeing in your clients in India? Is there a distinction between those who are embracing the digital change and those who are dragging behind? And is it something about size, scale, legacy?
I think to Prem's point, it's more about education. So one thing that we do is every 2 times per year, and I think Arun, you mentioned this too, we do a global roadshow on India, and most times the multinationals in the US, Europe, don't realize how technologically advanced India is. So that's point one. So to give you two real examples, last year we did an education session with the supply chain of a FMCG beverage company. And through that, we were able to educate the suppliers not to accept cash checks, which is predominant within India, move to either ACH or to UPI. And through that exercise, they were able to save $3.2 million of tangible costs, but also improve their sustainability score. So I do think that people don't really realize, unless you're in India, how much it's advanced especially over the past 3 to 4 years. I was surprised. The first time I visited India on a business context was in 1994. So I've been in banking 26 years, even though I look about 14.
How do you do it? That's my next question. Next question. How does he do it?
Yeah, I just moisturize well. But in all seriousness, I do think people don't realize outside of India how much it's progressed, one, but also how much opportunity there is, even to a news. I'm going to be stealing your whole presentation, but with the GSTN, right? 10 million businesses on the platform now. Before it used to be different tax systems, everything was paper-based, now it's all electronic, right? So just the efficiency, it's truly amazing. I mean, if I could, I'm pro-India.
Yeah. I mean, the story, the numbers are, but let me talk to you, because Freshworks is expanding globally. You're in Europe, you're building the business in Europe. Yeah. Where does India itself figure in terms of importance for you now as a global business?
Actually, it's completely blown us away. Because if you look at companies where startups are, especially I'm talking business software, most companies originate in the United States. And it's in Silicon Valley, conjures up an amazing solution and say, we're going to take over the world. And this is how it has been done time again, right? With the exception of China. China has its own large ecosystem. But this is the first time there are companies which are outside of Silicon Valley. Its typical ecosystems are, I would say, Tel Aviv as a hub. From Australia, there's a company called Atlassian. It's $20 billion worth. It's the first company to come that size. And it's coming from India. But all of them have one thing in common. They build the products day one for the American market. Because that's the biggest market in the world. Let's just go, if we can succeed in the US, we can succeed elsewhere. We started the same way. Even though we picked the democratic design principles, our principle was applied to mostly English-speaking advanced economies. So we really didn't think, this was 8 years ago, we didn't think, well, India will be a tough market. Like I said, it's a punishing market, both in terms of payments and getting through all the different loopholes and everything like that. So it was very, very difficult. We said it's too much headache. But guess what? We found out the pull from India put us, it's the number 3 country in our revenue map today, and we didn't expect it. We were thinking, even if you look at the GDP map, it should be much lower, but taking China and Japan out, which are complex markets, we haven't have a footprint there. India is actually number 3, right after US and UK. And for us, this was like, this is staggering. And I'll add one point to that where it's coming from. I'll give an example of a company called PhonePe. PhonePe is a payment company built on all the infrastructure that, including Aadhaar and Unified Payment Interface. It started in 2015. In 3 years, they had 140 million users. They were processing 2 billion transactions. Now imagine, it's like a 3-year-old kid. Imagine any company scaling from 0 to something like that in 3 years. They simply have to, they cannot scale by throwing people at it. They have to digitize like crazy. And that's where we came in, and we are powering them, because these are first-time users using their phone, trying to make a payment, issues, they call the phone. So they are automating to the nth degree. They are using bots, they are using ML, and they are trying to do that in local languages. It's just phenomenal. And when usually we used to say very interesting case studies from, let's say, the US or the UK to showcase what happens in India or other countries. But now we tell the story saying, here's a company which went from 0 to 140 million subscribers in 3 years, and look how they're able to support their customers using so few people, using the best of breed technology that's available. And companies here are taking note. They're like, okay, tell us how they did it. We want to learn from that. So I'm seeing a lot of that, and this is happening mostly predominantly from India and China, where they had to innovate very differently, and there is a different type of innovation coming from those markets, and that's actually feeding back to the mature economies where the scales are very different, and the adoption was also slightly slower, depending on, especially in Europe. This is what I see. Yeah.
Prem, please. Yeah.
I was just going to add on to me. We are seeing the same trend as well, because as and when we started investing in UK and taking those companies back to India, we've recently started investing in Indian business and giving them global scale, because these are companies which are solving global problems. And if I had to kind of pick one other point from your presentation, I know you mentioned about IoT and logistics. We recently have completed an investment in a company coming out of South India. Now, how many of you here know about Indian Oil Corporation Limited? Right, brilliant, good. Now, how many of you know how many trucks do they have? It's 25,000 trucks. What they do is oil and gas transport across the nation, 35,000 trucks every single day. Oil and gas alone, just within Indian Oil Corporation Limited alone, they lose 250,000 pounds every single day because of pilferage and adulteration. And all this company has done is come up with this IoT technology, which is coupled with the logistics and which can only kind of open the lock or remove the lock remotely, and it cannot be tampered with. So, interestingly, that company has already won roughly about $9 million of revenue. And that is over a 3-year period. And that's a global problem, not just within oil and gas, in minerals, mining, coal, jewelry, dairy products, and that's a global problem. And the more and more we speak about that, the more and more we look to talk to various people around here or in the Western world where we've expanded our operations into, that technology doesn't exist. So these are called Indian tech for the world. And we've done the same in yet another company which is in the field of aviation, which reduces aircraft turnaround time. So digitization in India on the business sector is also happening, and those technologies are also kind of finding their way into the global market and addressing global problems.
That's really interesting. We host here at Asia House a lot of senior political figures from Asia, from the UK, and the business figures. And we sometimes get a little weary of hearing UK political figures saying Asia can learn a lot from the UK. The message from you two is that there's a huge amount happening in India, which the world can learn from and adopt and embrace.
For two reasons. One is the sheer volume.
Yeah.
The other is the cultural thing, wherein we are all trying to kind of. The Indian culture is how can I save cost? It's like you walk into a Louis Vuitton shop. Can I have buy one get one free and still 20% discount, right? We apply that regimentedly in both in our personal front and also in the professional front in businesses. We always try it. It's about top line and bottom line, as simple as that. And the minute you're able to deliver that. In such a humongous scale of 1.3 billion people or the business around that, then it's a global, you're addressing a global market.
Yeah,
I think to add to Prem's point, one more reason why I think the world can learn from India at this point is because digital is unfolding in a context where there are massive unmet needs and unsolved problems.
So there's demand.
They are just the toughest problems. How do you get sort of piped gas or stored cooking gas to a remote village, right, and serve a rural household? Without sort of digital technology to help you think through that supply chain, you will never do it. How do you help a food cart owner actually, on the basis of her daily turnover, use some algorithms and come up with a credit scoring and actually give her money? Without digital, you just can't solve that problem. So it's a combination of what technology allows, but also the hardest problems in the world that you're trying to solve, and a bit to the point made around, affordable, creative, frugal, all of that coming together.
Yeah, I mean the price points, again, I do want to get on to how to scale that, but last I want to come to you first. Are you seeing any particular sectors leading the way through your client base?
I would say from a banking perspective, what we're seeing is more from the B2C. Is really capturing most of the benefits because of the pure volume, right? Especially for telecommunications, for utilities. Previously, now you can get your bill online, you scan the QR code, instantly pay by UPI, so it's completely electronic. So from that perspective, we're seeing a lot of benefits. Also for the last mile collection that Anu talked about, really trying to get those people who don't understand the banking system educated to accept payments by UPI versus paper and cash, speeding up the cycle of receivables, but also to make sure that that last mile actually can capture the digital benefits. So I do think from that perspective, we're seeing huge changes, but also to everyone's point up here is the data.
Yeah.
I think that's critically important too, is by using the digital information, you're actually going to be able to assess the buying behaviors of your consumers and improve your product, but also learn about your consumers. And you don't really be able to capture that through paper. So for example, we're working with a petrol station. Whenever they do an incentive, they have a QR code, and you can actually track what the person buys, how they buy it, so going forward, they can make more educated decisions. So I think the data aspect is critical part too. If I can just mention one thing, what Arun mentioned about the speed of implementation in India. I think from the UPI perspective, it's amazing. 2016, we worked with MPCI to launch it. Now you have over 120 banks and over 3 billion transactions just last year. It's amazing. You don't see countries where the uptake is that quick. So I think it's quite exciting. Not only putting things in practice, but actually implementing it, it's truly amazing.
Yeah, I do want to bring in the audience very shortly, so please start thinking about your questions, but I want to grab this while I've got it. We talked about price, pressure on prices, the nature. Yeah. Has that stood Freshworks in good stead in terms of its business models going globally?
Of course, I would say yes. Right? So actually, let's take a step back. What is price, right? Price essentially is setting two things. It's signaling your perception of value for that particular one, or quality. The second thing, it's also clearly defining the market. If I price a handbag at 10,000, I'm clearly saying it's not for you, it's for you. It's a very clear signaling. And oftentimes, when products and services are designed in the Western world, it was with the Western market in mind. And then they take it to the developing market, they realize, oh, the affordability is low, we are not going to make a market share. So immediately it's kind of a discount game. And they treat it as like, hey, here's a revenue gen and here's a loss leader. Even if you take large companies like Facebook, the amount of money they make per user in the United States is actually subsidizing the amount of money they're spending in India to run their servers, right? Because the advertising spend hasn't caught up yet. So for us, what happened was we took the democratic principles and, like, say again, the IKEA principles, because we all know, I'm sure some of our grandparents had a furniture in their living room which was built inside that, right? You cannot even take it out. But IKEA completely democratized and said it's primarily people thought it's for college students and so on and so forth, but it slowly stepped up the game to the next level. So we did that basically to say, here's a product and we could build it with a high level of craftsmanship and love, and that will create a wow experience for your customers. And when we show the price point, they literally flip over their chair. And I'm not kidding this. We have lost deals where large institutions, which are used to spending millions and millions of dollars in software, they said, I don't think this is right. You are either drinking high based on VC funding, so you are going to actually pull the rug under our feet later, or your quality is very, very poor, or you don't know what you're doing. It's one of those signaling. And so now we are tinkering our storytelling to say, no, this is a whole new paradigm shift. We want to disrupt the whole space, what it was meant to, how it was perceived. And that is taking a lot of storytelling, and we are almost being an evangelist to say, actually, you can have it at a certain price point, and we're trying to use some examples like IKEA to make the point home, and that's the biggest challenge we have.
So you've lost deals.
We have lost deals.
Because your price point is too low.
As recent as 2 weeks ago, I was like, this is so crazy. This person and this lady, I met her again at a conference, and she was walking back to the coffee, and she'll come and say, are you sure all this is included in this, what you're saying? And multiple times I said, I swear on my grandmother's this is true. And this is what's happening. Yeah.
So you must, Prem, see lots of opportunity if that's the sort of experience that Freshworks is having.
Absolutely. I mean, from our perspective, price point is good. from a VC perspective, as what Warren Buffett would say, you enter at a low entry point and exit at a higher entry point. And it's quite evident from some of the, what we call the golden nuggets, we call these companies, which are solving, companies like Freshworks, we missed them out, but anyway. We invest in some companies in India which are solving global problems, bring them over to the Western world, cross-pollinate technology transfer with a view to kind of give them market access global, make them much more global, and then exit at a higher point. And it's fairly simple. I mean, for example, if I have £1 million, my ability to kind of take stock positions in a company, in an unlisted equity, diminishes from east to west today. At the same time, my ability in terms of valuations exits diminishes from west to east. So it's a simple philosophy we're following. Yeah.
Let me bring the audience in now, please. If you just raise your hand if you want to ask a question, we'll bring around as I would expect. Microphone, Ravi, we'll start with you. Just name an organisation too, please, if you wouldn't mind.
Ravi Bulchandani, VAR Capital and Imperial College. Thanks for a brilliant discussion and presentation. It's nice to see the Indian government somewhat unusually being a facilitator of business. But in the process, they've amassed data now on close to 1 billion Indians. Do you worry about the privacy and political aspects of that? Do we have the right safeguards? And more generally, how are they approaching competition policy? I note that in the payment space, they've got Paytm and SBI, but I understand that WhatsApp is running into trouble with its payments platform in India. Is there still a bit of reflexive anti-foreign investment sentiment in digital?
Fantastic
Thank
question.
you.
The data one in particular, because I was going to get to that, because it's a huge global issue. And there's no doubt the government has a massive amount of data, immensely useful, but will there be a pushback? So please, Anu, start with you.
I think it's a very good and important question. I think if you go back to the fundamentals of Aadhaar and the India stack that's developed on top of Aadhaar, the very design of that at its core is actually very compliant with principles of data minimization, actually. Because Aadhaar, in the words of Nandan Nilekani, who's one of the architects of Aadhaar, it's basically a dumb system, as in, it doesn't care who's asking. As long as it's an authorized requesting party, it doesn't really recognize what the request is for or store that information. It only stores if I'm a registered user in Aadhaar or a registered enrolled person in the Aadhaar database. It only has information about my gender, age, and address. It doesn't have, for example, financial information or what caste or religion I am or anything like that. And then every time it authenticates, it just compares the biometric feed with the record and gives a yes/no answer. So the core of Aadhaar does not actually store masses of data. It is not designed to do that. As you go away from the core into the Aadhaar-enabled ecosystem, if you think about lots of innovators, and these are not necessarily government, there are lots of innovators interacting with customers in lots of different ways. So the question that you ask becomes more and more relevant. So how are you actually regulating data privacy and all of those issues? What is good about India, and it does feel like sort of from an innovator's perspective, it does feel like a 1 step forward, 2 steps back, but it's a healthy trend and a journey you would expect any economy to go through. So what's good is civil society actually raised a bunch of questions. The Supreme Court of India actually engaged on those questions about the validity, constitutional validity of Aadhaar, and what it should be allowed to be used for versus not. So there was a very extensive sort of hearing with the highest court, a judgment that came out that upheld the validity of Aadhaar and then laid out certain legal requirements, and then reenactment of certain laws that actually, as well as a draft privacy bill, heavily inspired by GDPR, many of the principles there. It's still draft. I think this session of Parliament or the next one should hopefully enact it. But these are parts, work in process, but I think with the collective pushes and pulls of businesses who want to innovate, a government that actually wants to use technology to drive efficiency, but also civil society who's concerned about all these questions. bubbling up these issues and helping move policy forward. So the answer is not sort of obvious or easy, but I think we're moving in the right
Right,
direction.
let's stay with the data for the moment. I do want to come back to the competition issue, but Lance, you were nodding there. Is that a view about the data issues?
Correct.
Any concern about the gathering of data, the use of data, given it is such a hot topic issue?
Well, number one, Mike, I'm quite upset. You asked everyone about price except for the banker.
But we know your
I
answer.
just want to go on record that pricing
Okay.
is not important to me. I care about the goodwill of the world. So I just want to put that in the ether right now.
That's the youthful answer we expected, yes.
Yes, you're welcome. So for me, data is always going to be a very big concern.
Yeah.
But I think to Anu's point, I do think Aadhaar, it's a biometric system, and it tries to give you the minimal amount of information, but to still achieve the benefit, right? So with the John Donne, your Jonas, a lot of people who weren't able to get the subsidies now can get electronically quickly through Aadhaar.
Yeah.
So I do think as long, we do have to take, well, not we, but I think the way that the Indian government is doing it is the right, most pragmatic way. I don't think they're rushing into it.
Yeah.
And I do think the baseline was give as little information as possible, even to the point, even with the UPI system, we're not giving bank account data. So the remitter can't see anything. So I do think it's important. I think out of any country, India has approached it in a very balanced way. So I mean, that's
Yeah.
my
Okay.
opinion.
Okay. And please, Prem.
Can I add a point
Yeah,
to
yeah.
Shika? So overall, I think it's something that we hear a lot, and I hear a lot every time we go. So, but if I take a step back, the whole process of digitization, right, is predicated on collecting as much data as possible, making the data move place A to B to get stuff and decisions and execute certain actions, right? Now, the problem is when you collect these data, every initiative is going to collect a lot of data, and it's going to be a lot of in different islands. And if you look at it, the whole world is grappling with the three things, like what is the solution? We haven't figured out what the right solution is because the bigger scandals or issues are happening in the Western world or companies that are based here, like say from Facebook to Cambridge Analytica to whatnot. These are really, really private, sensitive, behavioral, and preferential data. And that I don't think we haven't figured it out. To the next point is the policy making, and Europe is leading the charge with GDPR. And I wouldn't say they nailed it. They're still fine-tuning it. And the last part is compliance. How is it going to be enforced? And I can tell you so many reports about in GDPR, it's not enforced whatsoever because there was a big report about the Irish DPA have not actually investigated or fined anybody, and a lot of the European governments are very upset about it because most of the American companies are domiciled in Dublin. So I think all parts needs to be solved. And the good news in India is it's still its nascent early stages, and there is a competent people looking at from the policy making standpoint. They're not only looking at from what's necessary for India, but also what's the trends happening globally. Like GDPR as a blueprint is a great example. But I think this is a big question for I would say the next 10, 15 years to figure out how to do this. Because there's no easy answers for this. There's no easy answers.
Yeah.
I just second the opinions from the co-panelists. I mean, even very recently we had 1.5 billion accounts of Google and Gmail and calendar accounts compromised. So that's going to continue. But going back to India per se, I mean, we have the backbone of Aadhaar. So there are some new initiatives by new governments. For example, the Tamil Nadu government, which is one of the states in India, you may call it a state with the size of actually UK population, 72 million, right? What they have done is they've initiated a new technology stack on top of the Aadhaar stack, and they're calling it predictive e-governance. So when a particular child is born, as soon as the birth certificate is registered, they're associating that with what they call Makkal number. Makkal is nothing but people, literally translation. And the government stack itself will send notification to the parents until they are minors, and after they are until they're majors, and after they are majors, they send it across to them to say, okay, fine. Have you taken your injection? Have you applied for your mark certificate? Have you applied for your transfer certificate, and so on and so forth? So this is all on a blockchain node, and that's how they're trying to kind of overcome this particular issue around data privacy. Now, have they succeeded in it? It's time to tell, because this was the second such initiative after Estonia, we gather. So things are evolving. There'll be new ways of data compromise happening. There'll be new ways of data privacy policies coming in, and infrastructure being put in place. But it's a continuous evolution, and we'll be battling it. That's my humble view.
Yeah. Just very briefly then, on the competition question and the WhatsApp issue, and then we'll come to the next question.
On the competition question, I think there is a very real consideration that the policymakers are trying to balance, which is how do you capture more value from digital transformation for India, for Indian residents, for Indian consumers, for Indian entrepreneurs, and ultimately for the Indian exchequer, right? So that is a real issue. I think data localization, therefore, is one set of policies that they think will enable more of that data, requiring, for example, data related to principals and users within India to be stored within India, is something that they hope will be useful to stimulate more data-based innovation and entrepreneurship within the Indian ecosystem. To the extent this is not, without getting into the specifics of the case, this might be more challenging for a global player versus a local Indian-born player or Indian house player, simply for reasons of context more than anything. It's not, I think, intended to discriminate against any player, but it's more driven off this idea that, how can India make the most of this. And in the manufacturing setup, electronics manufacturing is the parallel to data localization, where there are a set of policies that have actually created incentives for more local manufacturing and more value add to be created in India, so that Indian labor can actually benefit from the massive rise in consumption of digital devices that we're seeing. So it's the parallel in the digital world.
Next question, please. I think there was one down there, please. So is it the microphone coming?
Hi, I'm Sumit Pillai. I'm part of an investment platform called Fiesta. My question for the panel was just comparing India's digital transformation journey to the Chinese journey. The Chinese journey has been led very much by the bats and the homegrown giants, so to speak. The Indian journey, on the other hand, India's open market. You've got, the biggest tech companies in the world in India. How do you see that differential play out in the next 20 years? Do you see any massive differences between the way the Chinese journey went, and that distribution that I know you talked about between the corporates on the one hand and the society on the other hand? How do you see this play out?
So compare China and India first. We'll start with you. Okay.
I think it will evolve. So, and the evolution is natural. I talked a little bit about the set of principles or policies that the government is thinking about in terms of trying to develop more opportunities for innovation and value capture for Indian entities. So that's one sort of trend that will make this change a little bit, perhaps, simply spurring more innovation locally. I think the second thing to note is that India is very different from China in that China had this massive advantage of one language, which creates a huge market around a set of innovations. In India, it's got to be more, the next wave has got to be more local, homegrown, and sort of bottom-up, simply because it's much more diverse at some level. And it doesn't mean that foreign companies can't do that, but foreign companies then would need to invest and innovate at a scale that allows lots of local solutions to actually come up. And those who are close to those opportunities have then a natural advantage in terms of being there and sort of innovating from the bottom. So I think things will change, but where we are is actually a function of where we've come from, I guess.
Yeah.
I would just add, you don't have to look too further than Europe, right? If Europe is one country as the United States of Europe, how many European digital champions are there today? And why are American companies dominating, whether it's a Google or Facebook or so on? Because I live in Germany, and there are companies that are built for the German market before they could iterate, get the product market fit right, and they think about other markets. That idea is already at scale. Silicon Valley is well known for blitzscaling. So only country that's comparable, if not very soon bigger, is China. So it's a completely different thing. But from the local market side, if you look at in India, most of the products, especially digital products, are built for the English-speaking Indian people, right? So that's, I don't know what the ratio is, maybe 20, 30%. And so the adoption, they quickly adopt whatever is available in the West, and it's very hard, and that's also the lucrative market in terms of wallet share and whatnot. And, but I don't think it will be too far before technology will enable for you to build products, because one of the things that we do, every time we release a new feature, it's available in 41 languages, right? And it took us a lot of time to get that right, because Hollywood took a long time. By the time Avengers movie is released in English, it's released in all languages. But to get that to that point, it's not easy. But we are leveraging technology and processes and stuff like that. But my gut feel is there will be a time where you'll be able to address the whole market as a whole, one single market. And only then the conditions are right for global companies. And of course, there are other things like, a lot of Indian companies also exit at a certain point. Like Flipkart is a classic example. It didn't create a conglomerate or a massive company like most of the Chinese companies because the laws of how equities are held and how there's a lot of things why a founder would want to sell versus want to grow big. And that's also, in China, it's very, very conducive for local entrepreneurs to continue to grow and grow abroad, whereas in India, it's slightly different.
Okay, please. Microphone here.
Hi, Christine Chow from Hermes Investment Management. I have a follow-up question on the localization preference you talked about and also the actual digitization process. So digital identity is not a new topic, and in different sectors that is happening. In banking, for example, Bank of England or maybe Hong Kong MA or Singapore, they will all have their own preferences for the digital process. But given that there is also a slight element of localization preference, how do you see that developing? Because if eventually we have to deal with cross-border, it could be payment, it could be trade. How does that pan out, and what has been the latest development of those discussions? Because different governments would have different preferences. And my second question is about the actual digitization. I was at the Parliament discussion on Monday night on AI and healthcare. And there was a bit of a sharing on actually the digitization process in itself. When you really kickstart, it's not so simple. Even NHS trust, there are many trusts, it's not just NHS, and government is not one government, it's different ministries or different entities. So even amongst the different NHS trusts, the way they record blood pressure of a patient is different. Has that process really kicked off in that big one integrated platform that's happening in India? Has the backlog of old records being looked at? Has the new standards been set? I just wonder where we are in that actual process. Thank you.
Right, thanks. Let's start with the ID question, cross-border ID, which is very important for banking, obviously. But we'll start with you.
Maybe, Lance, you can address the cross-border angle. I'd like to start with the second question, if I may. I think that's a great question. It is incredibly complex. And I don't think, there is a lot of work to be done across many different domains to reach levels of, even shared understanding of fundamental data structure or definitions, and leave alone, processes of how to go about it. The health ministry in India, since you talked about health, is actually grappling with this as we speak. So there's a piece around a legislation or a policy that actually sets up some standards, if you will, for electronic health records. Hugely complex in of itself. We've seen lots of advanced economies grappling with this, but there's that piece going on. There is a piece that's actually trying to think about bite-sized chunks to say that you might actually think about electronic health records in the context of immunization, right? Or in the context of maternal and child health. Take one program, digitize it end to end, think through issues of data compatibility and definitions in that context, because the whole piece is just too complex and too difficult, given how many fragmented stakeholders there are in, let's say, the health value chain. So lots of work to be done, absolutely no doubt about that. And we are at an early stage. I think India is at an early stage of thinking about this.
Prem, would you go along with that? Bite-sized chunks? Is that
bite-sized chunks, definitely yes. But I think to put things into reality, I spoke about 648,000 villages in India today, right? Most of these villages do not even have primary health care today.
Yeah.
right? That's the reality, right? But having said that, can we do that with digitization? Absolutely yes. And I'll give you one real example. We are now looking at a company in the US, which is actually kind of, you just blow into an instrument for 30 seconds. It takes about 10 different vital parameters and then says, what is that you do? Now think about the first question we asked, what can we do? To the CEO, we asked the question, what does it take for us to order 45,000 such units? Because we have a distribution network. Now, think about that. Each of these villages having 500 to 1,000 people. And we have those community service centers you mentioned about just 400,000. We rolled it out to this network. The kind of data that we get, all of a sudden we leapfrog from the primary care to all the way to a secondary care. That is to be done. It's not done today. We are probably about 3, 4, 5 years out. But that is something that India as a country will demonstrate, as it has demonstrated in telecoms, as it demonstrated in manufacturing, and all the other sectors that today we are seeing where in telecoms we leapfrog landlines all the way to mobile phones. And in banking, we leapfrog from, are leapfrogging from cash payments to cardless payments. So those things will evolve, but we are out today. It's a journey in its own right.
The ID question, I think, is really important.
Can you just repeat it again? Because I completely forgot it. Sorry. I'm just being honest. I'm just being honest.
Well, digital identity has been a discussion in multiple sectors. One obvious one that is quite advanced is banking.
Correct.
And different regulators, whether it's Bank of England or Hong Kong MA or regulators in Singapore, would have their own preferences, such as in India would prefer to have a strong localization and or a preference of a particular architecture. Some would say that banks may be well positioned to be the one that safeguards this. Some might say it's a tech company, some might say it's a government. Where is that discussion now?
Wow. You shouldn't have asked the question again.
Cross-border banker.
Told you the questions would be good.
If you're next to me, Anu, I'll tag you in now. Well, from a HSBC lens, we do work very closely with the central bodies, right, to talk about cross-border payments and also identity. I mean, I'm not close enough to that question to be quite candid, so I may need to follow up on that, because that's actually a fairly loaded question. So my team's there, they'll make sure that I...
Perhaps catch them later, but I mean, it is key to the whole sort of IDing and authentication for banking is the sort of cutting edge of where it's happening.
I also have to be careful what I say. So.
Okay. On the ID question, you're a global business. Standards, global standards, I guess, is the issue between global protocols.
I think a lot has been said already. Like, say, in India, when there is no standards, because NHS is our customer, we work with them, we understand the history is important. They all created, evolved over time, and then sprung up as one unit. So the established traditions and standards and policies are different, like you talked about a measurement, right? But when we don't have anything, and you come up with a technology solution like what he was suggesting, you kind of leapfrog, and that's what you've seen in China. Like, it's like consistent things across. They can come up with one. And in Europe, you have to struggle because there's a lot of legacy. And I'll give maybe not a ID question, but IBAN is a classic example because of the European Union. So, they have one protocol, and which is IBAN, and all European countries string up together. But if I can go on and on, in Europe itself, there's a lot of work to be done. Like, we have to now, I have 5 officers that have to comply with so many rules and regulations by each country. I need expensive lawyers and bankers to make sure we are compliant. It's very difficult to do business. Whereas if you have a simple one, it's not only easy, but it's also scalable. Yeah.
But IBAN is an identity attribute. It's not an identity.
Yes, exactly. It's not identity. Exactly. The identity is, that's why I was saying it's not identity. Even to transact for 2 people or 2 systems to speak in the same language, you had to create that. And for India, you won't have that problem too much because it didn't exist before.
Okay, let's move. Next question, there's a gentleman down there.
Yeah, hi. Sahil Manari here. I'm an investor in fintech companies. My question, Anu, was more to the part you put up, which talked about how in India the public-private partnerships are driving a lot of the platform creations, unlike China or say even Google. How much? I suppose it's a 2-part question. One is how much have you thought about the industry structure, because it ends up being a winner takes all. If you do look at a lot of digital ecosystems, that's what happens. And even if you take the data example in India, I mean, at the end of the day, it's being led by one player, that whole cost of data going down. So A, have you looked at the industry structure implications on different parts? And B, is there a fear that there will be natural monopolies created which may actually end up hindering the pace or the progress, or indeed the benefits at which the digital distribution gets done?
That's a great question again. I think we haven't looked at industry structure in any great depth, but it's clear that the whole process of data aggregation and the value that you can create from it does create massive advantages to those who enter early and build scale early, right? So that creates the natural monopoly kind of phenomenon that we've seen world over in a whole range of private sector dominated digital ecosystems. I think the spirit of at least the government's thinking around the public digital platforms is to some extent mitigating, or at least the intent is to some extent mitigate the risk of too much consolidation in the hands of a few semi-monopolistic entities in each of these data ecosystems. Because if you set this up as something which is intended to be more like a public good or a shared good, then in a way you're kind of reducing the value of that aggregation in the hands of any one other player, right? So now whether that actually pans out or not is a moot point. The government in India has done great things, but is not, no government anywhere is necessarily the best at figuring out, how to actually create a data platform, right? So we'll have to see how it actually pans out. Done well, I think it can actually be a very different industry structure that can actually spawn and support lots of smaller, innovative models by the government in its public good capacity playing that aggregator role. So that could well happen, but we'll have to see how it plays out.
Yeah. Prem.
It's evolving, is the answer. I wouldn't talk about the fintech side of things. Again, yet another portfolio business of ours. So 2025, fast forward, India is a $5 trillion economy. $2 trillion will come from the MSME segment, right? The point is, if MSME segment today does not have the capex to invest into new technologies and make way for the future. So what we are doing today is an industrial IoT company where we are trying to, let's underline the word, trying to partner with at least 3 state governments to provide digital factory as a service to these MSMEs in collaboration with the governments, identifying about 100 MSMEs in a couple of districts in each of these 3 states, and then demonstrate tangibly about the ability to improve productivity on a per footfall basis, reduce quality issues, and so on and so forth. But over a period of if we do this in Q1 and Q2, in Q3 and Q4, we'll be able to demonstrate GDP growth by a few basis points. But what that results in is the data aggregation of the data that is coming from these MSME segments, and that will evolve into other forms of innovative models which the government is able to effectively plan and roll out other new products, also attracting other innovative companies to be able to do so. We're seeing the trend evolving. The challenge is because not the government's unwillingness, if I would. It's more about trying to educate the people on the ground as to what this can actually deliver as tangible and getting them to visualize what the future would look like, in addition to creating localized jobs.
Is there a risk, though, of big players emerging in the ecosystem, or do you find through your client base that the small, medium companies are faster, more nimble, and embracing the digital changes?
I do think it's more on the educational side. So whoever onboards it the quickest usually has the first mover advantage. That's what we've seen from a corporate and also from kind of a SME, to your point, perspective. Making sure that you understand the market, the local content, and the language is extremely important. Yeah. One thing people underestimate is that, I believe Prem mentioned this, oftentimes multinationals going into India don't realize that it's multiple languages, hundreds of languages. And also, to Anu's point, that the complexity of the country is more of a continent. Yeah. Right? That's something that people don't realize, and especially the SME, MMEs who don't have that international experience oftentimes get some growing pains when they first enter, because it's a completely different ballgame.
Yeah, yeah. Again, you talk about democratization and the like. Is that part of that broader philosophy of embracing small and medium businesses, the social change, and is it playing into that?
Well, our ethos was every product that we build, we have 10 products, we always build it for the SMB segment. The reason is if you want to be democratic design, and one of the principles is simplicity, self-reliance, and their ability to use right then. The first product we built, it was sold to 5 customers in 4 different continents. And we have 35,000 customers. We haven't ever spoken to 15,000 customers ever. And this is a business software. So it has to be easy for them to look at it with a few clicks, set up. We talked about education. So we'll have a lot of just-in-time snippets of video training, tells them how to do and set it up and go. And these are companies which doesn't have a large IT department, or forget, they don't even have IT-savvy people. So that's where our principle apply, and that's where we test our mettle to see whether we can succeed. And Google has enabled our ability to reach these customers. Previously, the biggest problem with this small and medium businesses is distribution.
Yeah.
It cannot be done at scale, but with Google, you have the intent. The moment they search for it, you pay the Google tax, and you get their attention, and you go. And only when it passes that test, we have a test which is, it hits a certain million in revenue in that segment, then we take the product to enterprise, build enterprise features around security, scalability, and all the things that we need, the enterprise wants. It's the next one. So there is a very interesting study that was spent by Google. The entire IT spend by enterprises is already eclipsed by IT spend of small and medium businesses. This is something a lot of people don't know, and because most companies build it for the Fortune 500 companies and so on, but they all have hundreds of people in IT departments, and with the digitization, it's only increasing. But the most impact is happening in the SMB sector, where as somebody who has a chain of bakery, and they have like 20 bakeries, and what kind of IT savviness they have in terms of to run an efficient digitized operation, and you need these tools and all the things that come together, and including financial payments, infrastructure, and all that to make it super easy and snappy. That's what's happening.
Look, we're just about out of time, and many things struck me about your report, but one takeaway for me is government policy being so supportive and government being so supportive. And we, again, talked to a lot of governments globally. A lot of them want to be digital players. A lot of them talk about being digital hubs. But it strikes me that the policies the Indian government is doing are actively accelerating the push from technology and the corporate side. Is that your take?
Absolutely. I think that's a fair take. And I think the reason is because the pursuit of greater efficiency, the prevention or the reduction of leakage and fraud, and then solving these hardest problems for citizens. I think these are the big 3 priorities for the government, and somewhere there is a sense that without acceleration on the digital front, you're not going to be able to meet these priorities. So I think it derives from this desire to actually make life better for people, as well as plug a lot of fraud, leakage, corruption, and other formalize the economy much more, and then digital technologies are giving you the tools to be able to do that.
Yeah. Would you go along with that the policies of the Indian government are more progressive in terms of digital adoption and the like, possibly because of the demand and social need?
I would agree with that. Also, I think you have really a convergence of the government's commitment to digital, but also consumers' need and hunger for digital. Because ultimately, the government wants to empower their individuals, but also make it more business friendly. And this is opening up an opportunity right now that I haven't seen in my 25 years. I think there's a great opportunity here.
Would you go along with that?
I would agree, Nothing much to add, but I think that it's very well said, because it's a great leveler of sorts, and it provides a platform. And I'll just go back to the whole thing of India didn't exist as a single market. It's a single country until GST went through. And these are things that's going to accelerate the new set of adoptions, and digital initiatives are going to be huge. The next 10 years is going to be very interesting.
Okay. And final word to you, Prem.
And I would agree. I mean, we spoke about the Pradhan Mantri's Jan Dhan Yojana. I mean, the company where I'm advisor to, the last 4 years, the quantum of transactions has increased from about 200 million to about $1.25 billion, which is government to citizens benefits. The average ticket size of transaction has increased from £8 to about £21 over the last 4 years. And then the number of transactions has increased from roughly about 5 million per year to about 40 million. And most importantly, this initiative, along with digital capabilities, has created 3,000 rural entrepreneurs, 52% of them being women. That's quite evidence.
Okay. Look, I'm afraid we are out of time. This has been a fascinating conversation. We've covered a whole sweep of issues. I think it's very clear from all that you've said there's an enormous opportunity in India, and over the 5-year time span, the sorts of change that will come could be quite extraordinary, quite breathtaking. Thank you all for being here. Please, would you thank my speakers, Lance Kawaguchi, Prem Barthasarathy, Arun Mani, and of course, Madgavkar.